Under-16s banned from using social media under strict new legislation in Australia. The government says it's to protect children, but big tech companies and some human rights groups say it won't work. What are the arguments and the views worldwide? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Bernard Smith. A new law in Australia banning social media use for under-16s is one of the toughest measures of its kind anywhere. It'll force companies such as X, Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat and others to stop teenagers signing up to their apps. Most Australians support the law, according to polling, but some social media experts say the onus should be on big tech, which should be more accountable for content. The apps rely on algorithms to hook users by identifying their likes and dislikes. Some studies say young brains are more easily moulded by what they see online. So what are the dangers, and do children need protecting? Is a ban like this the way to do it? We'll explore these issues with our guests in a moment, but first this report by Katia Lopez-Horian.
It's being described as the toughest law yet to be imposed on big tech, with Australia passing the world's first age-based social media ban. The government says it's designed to safeguard children's physical and mental health.
We don't argue that its implementation will be perfect, just like the alcohol ban for under-18s doesn't mean that someone under 18 never has access, but we know that it's the right thing to do.
The ban, which applies to all children under the age of 16, is fueling an international debate.
Since I struggle with mental health issues like anxiety and depression, I think it would make those a lot worse than they already are and could really affect, my life.
We should take it upon ourselves to regulate our own personal social media usage rather than being forced off of it.
Restrictions on social media aren't new. In France, minors under 15 require parental consent to create accounts. Germany, Italy, and Belgium have similar regulations. And across borders, debate about China-owned TikTok have raised concerns for years.
And certainly this law is also about TikTok and needs to be also seen in this geopolitical context.
In the U.S., some states are exploring limiting kids' social media exposure, with some accusing big tech companies of using algorithms to deliberately target minors and increase their revenue.
Would you like now to apologize to the victims who have been harmed by your product? Show them the pictures.
At a congressional hearing about how social media companies haven't done enough to protect minors, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg apologized to parents earlier this year. Questions about how to regulate social media giants have long hung over the industry, and they're getting louder as the share of users who've never known life without it grows.
I wouldn't like a ban like that in Spain. I think they should have organised a demonstration because that's crazy.
Some tech giants are pushing back against Australia's new law, raising questions about freedom of speech and limiting access to information. But Australia is a test case, and other governments are likely to watch carefully to gauge its impact and how successfully it can be enforced. Katia Lopez-Horian, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
The law is meant to protect minors. So before we hear from our panel, we'll speak with the teenage journalist Leo Puglisi about how the move is being received by his peers. Here he is on the channel he founded, 6 News Australia.
As you all know, I'm a bit younger than your average reporter, and as such, I'm still in high school. Shocker, I know, along with about half of our team. And like with all school years, we have a school camp which goes for 4 days, 3 nights this Tuesday. Now, the only reason I bring this up is because on the camp we cannot have any electronics for the entire time there, basically meaning that I won't be available to report on news or even look at your messages from Tuesday to Friday night at all.
And Leo joins us now from Melbourne. Leo, you spoke to the Joint Select Committee on Social Media and Australian Society about all of this. Would you be where you are today if there was this social media ban in place a few years ago?
Thanks for having me. No, I wouldn't be where I am today with that social media ban in place. 6 News wouldn't have existed if that social media ban is in place. The reality is we've been able to grow as a national streaming news channel by having 13, 14, 15-year-olds see our work, be passionate in journalism and media, and join up. And I think, that would be a real shame to lose if I have to say so myself. But look, we've been able to grow for almost 6 years now. That clip is more than a few years old, as your viewers might note, but certainly wouldn't have been here today. And I think this ban generally stifles creativity.
And if it were in place, how would your peers react to it? Would they just get around it? Would they find somewhere else? What would they do?
I think young people are absolutely going to get around it. Look, I've got a younger brother who's 14 years old, and I'm sure he'll be spending the next 12 months, because the implementation is not for another year. He'll spend the next 12 months figuring out how to get around it. Look, I think, initially when this was proposed, there were, some views that, maybe this will be a good idea. But when you look at the past few months and the fact it's been really rushed and the, back and forth on what platforms are going to be included, I guess there's a lot of, almost just laughing at just how rushed it's been by people who maybe don't understand social media. So definitely young people are going to bypass this legislation.
Well, yeah, on your last point there, this is your world. This is the world you grew up in, particularly Generation Z. Do people twice your age and older know what they're talking about, you think, in relation to this?
I think some maybe don't, and I think that's a real problem. We have to have a lot of consultation with young people about a law that directly affects them. As you mentioned, I was lucky enough to speak to a joint select committee about this, but I think we need a lot more consultation. The public submissions were only open for 24 hours. An inquiry only ran for about 3 hours. This is really significant legislation. As everyone's saying, right, the world is watching. That's absolutely true. So you have to get this right. You have to take it really slowly, and you have to make sure it's done right. Again, it's not even coming in for another 12 months. So I'm not particularly sure what the rush is, other than the fact we've got an early federal election next year.
All right, Leo Puglisi, thanks very much for your time. Let's bring in our guests. In Melbourne, we have Mark Andrejevic. He's a professor at Monash University School of Media, Film and Journalism. He's also a specialist in the implications of data mining and online monitoring. In New Delhi, we have Nirali Bhatia, a cyber psychologist and the founder of Cyber BAAP, an anti-cyber bullying campaign. And in Dublin, we have Noeline Blackwell, a human rights lawyer and the online safety coordinator for the Children's Rights Alliance. Welcome to you all. Mark, I'll start with you. We just heard from Leo there, and apart from making me feel very old, he doesn't think that people sort of my age or our age really know what we're talking about here.
Well, he may have a point to some extent, at least in terms of our experience with these platforms. The one thing that I think is really important to add to some of the points that he made, which are also important in the way in which this legislation was rushed in and some of the concerns that have been raised about the implementation, I would add that it's important to think about the larger context of the platforms that are being targeted. These are commercial platforms whose primary goal is not to encourage the creativity of young people or to provide them with safe spaces. Their priority is to make money off of collecting as much detailed information as they can about the users and then using that to market and advertise to them. We know, for example, that there's been a history of companies. Facebook was found to have been doing research that indicated that it knew when young people were feeling inadequate or insecure, and they were actually sharing this information with advertisers as something that they claimed that they were able to do. We know advertisers are interested in that information because that's what they trade on in terms of trying to sell products. Once upon a time, we were quite concerned about exposing young people to forms of barrages of advertising. These platforms do this with the extra added charge of all of the information they're able to collect. So I think it's important to think about that context when we imagine what type of spaces we want available for young people. Okay. I think it's really important that they have spaces for communication and for creativity, but do they have to be these hyper-commercialized spaces? There are perhaps other alternatives. This type of legislation might make us think about the possibility of alternatives.
Noeline, Australia's Communication Minister, Michelle Rowland, she says it's about protecting young people, not punishing or isolating them. That seems like a fairly sensible approach to take, doesn't it?
Well, I think that aim is a good one, and it's really important to remember that. What is this legislation actually going to do? And I think my view is that actually what you are doing is recognizing that social media companies as commercial organizations, as selling products, do have a duty and an obligation to ensure that their products are safe, including safe for children. But the way you make those products safe isn't by excluding children from their right to be part of the world in which we live, their right to communicate, their right to engage, their right to get information. You don't punish them by excluding them, and you don't punish them and their parents by putting the duty on them. It seems to me that we will probably be talking about the same thing. How do you ensure that products that have been around for about 20, 30 years now, where they have been totally unregulated and they've allowed, we've all allowed those products to become hyper-commercial, to use Mark's terminology, which is really good. Now we have to regulate. But what are we doing? We're regulating the children. We're banning the children and young people, and not even all children. We're saying children under 16. We are not giving them the opportunity to be part of the digital age in which we live. So the ambition is right, and the minister's ambition to keep children safe is a good one and a necessary one for government. But the method of banning children from the digital world, I would take issue with, and I doubt that it's actually even practically effective.
Nirali, in India, where social media is as wildly popular as it is elsewhere, is this the wrong target, as Noeline might suggest?
As Noeline suggested, the intent is fantastic. While personally I'm of an opinion that we have reached a point where we're looking at very stringent measures like a ban. What we need is a collective movement where collectively we decide that this is not good for children, and no children of that age group, if they do not have access, then they don't feel that fear of missing out, or they do not feel that, I don't know about this or something like that. So if I look at the ban as a collective movement, then it is the right time, because young children do not really have the cognitive maturity to understand what's in their best interest. And of course, we are only banning social media apps, right? We're not banning access to internet. So there are going to be multiple other options. Appropriate information can be shared by educators and by parents. So it's not like they're going to be left out of that entire digital learning thing. I believe, especially as a country like mine, where regulation is becoming a big challenge and the usage is very popular. We are a young nation. We are made of young population, and a lot of detrimental effect is what we are seeing on the young population. So we need those kind of stringent measures. I agree that ban is never a foolproof, method to do it. But I guess we can begin with that, so that we held these social media companies responsible to, put in the right measures.
And can I also ask you, Nirali, because TikTok, which might be one of the target apps, has been banned in India since 2020, mainly because of a row between India and China. But has there been any notable effect in the 4 years since that ban has been in place?
So if you ask me if people are still using TikTok, the numbers are drastically low. Yes, there would be a very minor percentage who would be around, figure out their way around it. However, the intent was not just the issue with China, but also the content irregularity, as in the exposure to age inappropriate content, was also an issue. Now, unfortunately, the ban of TikTok was actually, productized by Meta, and Instagram has taken over. So I would say the long-term impact is lost. But however, the ban did see that the usage is very minimal. And that's why I believe in these kind of stringent measures when the time is right and when regulation is becoming very difficult to, actually implement.
All right. Mark, can you help us understand what apps the Australian legislators are and aren't thinking of, and then what happens when other apps inevitably appear years down the road?
Well, it's not clear yet exactly which apps are going to fall within the ban and which will be excluded. There's been a lot of reporting that suggests major commercial social media platforms like TikTok, X, Meta's Facebook will fall within the ban. There's been some discussion that YouTube might be excluded from the ban, in part because YouTube is so heavily used in the educational sector, which is an interesting question in itself. I would suggest that the focus should be on those platforms that are the most aggressively commercialized and that are structured in ways that are designed precisely in order to get people to spend as much time as possible and manipulate them in ways that get them hooked on these platforms in order to serve ads to them and in order to collect information to more effectively manipulate them. I think it's probably the commercial character that we should focus on more than the social character, although that is not how the law has been framed. But when it comes to interpreting it, it's going to be interesting to see which are those platforms that are considered to be the ones that parents and kids are most concerned about in their lives. So it'll be interesting to see how that takes shape.
All right. Noeline, these apps are there to make money at the end of the day. Should we not somehow be putting these social media companies on notice that things have got to change?
Yeah, and that really is where it seems to me we can make our best effort, is where we recognise that these are commercial companies that, like, to take another example from a different area, banks take in our money and they are regulated and required to keep it safe. It's not perfect, but there's strong regulation happening in that area. We are at the very early stages of regulating the tech companies. They are not used to it. Like Nirali says, it is difficult. But surely what we should be doing is regulating and requiring them to produce safe products, like we do of other people who have commercial products that they sell. These should be safe. They should be safe for our children. And that is where, but it's harder. I mean, politically, it is easier to explain. We're just banning it. It is not good for children necessarily. It's not recognizing their rights, but it is easier. Regulation is hard. It does mean taking on the tech companies, but that's really going to be the ultimate solution. Taking them on and ensuring that if they make profits on safe products.
Nirali, when they banned TikTok in India, people went to Instagram, they went to Snapchat, to other apps. You can't put the genie back in the bottle, can you?
It's going to be very difficult. But with children, the advantage is that because we are doing this collectively, they don't feel that they're going to miss out. When TikTok went out, it was for everybody, right? It was not for one particular community. And for a very long time, before, YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels came in, which are alike TikTok, people were living with it, without it also, and not complaining. So even with this ban, I feel that it should not be that, now we are banning certain popular tech companies and these platforms. Local ones should start stemming up, then you lose the purpose. So the idea is that, yes, going back may be a little difficult, but we are not going back completely. We are only and only focusing on the apps which are designed to be addictive in nature, which are, putting forward first their profits and then the welfare of young people and young children. So only those are the ones which we are identifying. And then there are different other ways. Internet, we are not disabling, right, for young children. So there are so many other right platforms and age-appropriate content can be reached out to them.
Mark, the Australian government said it went forward this legislation so it unburdened parents from the policing role. But shouldn't it be parents that are monitoring what's going on and parents making the final decision?
I think it probably should be a collective effort to figure out how, as a society, we want to manage some of the concerns that we have. Putting the onus on parents in terms of enforcement would obviously be, I think, onerous, much too onerous. With what we have now currently, of course, is de facto parental regulation. But as has been suggested, there are network effects to these platforms. So if all of a particular peer group are on, and then one child is told by their parents, well, no, we'd rather that you weren't on, there's a fair amount of social pressure and some actually good reasons that kids can have to make the case. I think part of the reasons for framing the legislation the way it was is to address some of those network effects.
Okay.
I think the point about regulation, I think, is a really important one. And one of the things that this legislation does is it kind of sends a signal to these platforms. You can't just keep proceeding the way you are. And I think there's, the speed with which it was put into place reflects some political imperatives, but I also think it reflects a kind of collective frustration that as a society has towards the power that these platforms have and the way they seem to be acting in ways that, although they serve a social function, is not necessarily socially responsible.
All right. Okay. Nirali, one of the catalysts for this legislation in Australia was because of the developmental stage that teenagers are at, particularly their brains. Help us understand what is different about a teenager's brain to one of somebody a bit older, in their mid-20s and older.
True. See, children and even teenagers, they are in their formative years. Their brain is not fully developed to have that cognitive maturity, responsibility, farsight, none of that. And hence, it is very, very important that at this point, we make sure that, we take the right decision for them. Also, at this age, it's the peer influence. It is then addictive behavior, which they are at a higher risk of. And these platforms are actually exploiting this kind of, vulnerabilities in the growing children. And that's where we need to take the stand. It's not like, I'm sure, like every other country, because this is a global phenomena, every country has reached out to the platforms, asked for regulations, but it's becoming challenging because of lack of response and lack of intent from their end. So somewhere we need to begin with these kind of instances, because like I said, that children are at this age, they are not the best judgments of what's good for them. And hence, we as adults need to intervene with a very, very strong and a collective effort.
So, Noeline, Generation Z, we're sort of talking about, born from 1996 to 2010. They are the first to grow up with asking to like, asking to retweet, taking selfies, looking for validation from friends. There's clearly a lot of evidence, it seems, that this is not a particularly healthy way to begin growing up. There should be some sort of way of managing that, shouldn't there?
Yeah, indeed there should. And I do hope, if Australia is going to go down this line, that at the same time it will do a lot of work in helping parents and children to understand what the digital environment is like, how to read it, how to understand it, how to manage it in some ways, so that we recognise now we don't have the situation we had at the turn of the century. We are 25 years on. So much is done online in our world that we have to have a generation who don't only know how to use social media apps, but who know how to stop using them, where there are boundaries, where it's appropriate. We have done this with other aspects of life through all the generations, educators, caregivers, parents where it's appropriate, schools, sports clubs, have worked with children to establish reasonable boundaries between various things they should do. So 30 years ago, children were sneaking comics and books into school and they were being told they couldn't use them. It is reasonable to say that you cannot use your social media when you're supposed to be doing your geography or your math. So these are things that we haven't done well either as a society. We haven't understood boundaries. We haven't understood how to be savvy about the digital world we live in. And that's going to be a huge part of the answer as well.
Mark, if young people are watching this programme and scrolling and watching simultaneously, we've had these moral panics before, haven't we? People said television would rot the brain. We've all managed to survive, haven't we?
Yeah, there is a long history, as you suggest, regarding moral panics around new media when they're introduced. The question of whether this is a moral panic is an interesting one. Certainly those people who are critical of the ban are suggesting that it is. When it comes to thinking about the forms of literacy that both parents and children need, I think it's obviously very important, but it's also important to have safety by design built into these systems. So, you wouldn't tell somebody entering a house that they should have, basic structural literacy in order to know if it's safe. We do expect certain spaces to be constructed safely, especially spaces that we entrust our children to. Regulation, one of the things that would be really important for it to do is to push these companies in the direction of building safety by design into the platforms. Right now, it's just not how it works. And again, I think this response reflects frustration over that fact.
Nirali, aren't our brains, younger brains, perhaps more resilient to change than we might think?
True. Yes, they are. They are absolutely resilient. It's very beautiful to see that for younger minds, everything is in a phase. They don't get hooked up to that particular phase. So it is initially, yes, because we are going to withdraw something that they already have access to, there is going to be a little bit of resistance. But because it is collective, it will work very beautifully because now none of my peers are using it. So I don't feel that.
All right. Lastly, with you, Noeline, governments often want to be seen to be doing something. Is this a government just wants to be seen to be doing something, or will it have long-term value?
Yeah, so there is undoubtedly there is that sense in which this looks like a silver bullet, and every government, every politician is looking for the silver bullet where they can say, this will keep our children safe, this will keep your children safe. This is not, we haven't even started talking about the practical way you would implement something like this. But this is a way in which, again, the focus is taken off the companies, is taken off the people who should be producing safe products, who should be designing safe products, and who should be respecting children in those designs. It could even make it worse because now they'll feel they don't have to bother with safe products for children in Australia.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes, the practical implications will have to be for another programme. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But thank you to all our guests, to Mark Andrejevic, to Nirali Bhatia and to Noeline Blackwell, and also Leo Puglisi, who spoke to us earlier. And thank you too for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. We are at AJ Inside Story. From me, Bernard Smith, and the whole team here, bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.